Chapter 570. Around 9:30 in the evening of December 14, 2096, a large amount of information was relayed to each and every circle, like dust and dirt swirling up in the air. Every time a hand was passed, some would be lost and some would be added. People called it analysis. In any case, each circle had its own understanding of the lecture scene in Xia City's Shangding Building's circular conference room. At the same time, they were also guessing the reactions of the other circles. A certain large capital circle with deep blue base as the center was currently carrying out related work. New intelligence was constantly being sent in and categorized into different categories and sent to the various authorities participating in remote meetings for discussion. Sandalwood is calling for a meeting. The scope of the meeting is at the level of the President, Vice President, Secretary General and Deputy Secretary General. Is it because of the confirmed deaths of missing people? Most likely. Then do you want to lead a wave of momentum? We can't let that plagiarist off easy. The formatting theory kid, who made hundreds of billions of investments vanish in a puff of smoke with just a few words, had already been given a new nickname. But this was far from enough to dispel the hatred in Herman's heart. He urgently wanted to do something, and he really could do something. Those idiots at the lobbying company have to prove the value of their existence. Isn't that Hunter Kim an official member of the association? Sandalwood should at least do something. This idea of driving the tiger to devour the wolf was worth discussing. A few of the participants chatted and began to sort out their connections in the upper echelons of the Ability User Association. However, Wang Ju didn't respond from beginning to end. He stared at Zhang Ji's live broadcast and paid attention to the current focus. After a few seconds, he turned his head and asked, "I remember there was a fund last year that went in this direction. The Abyss area and the Polar region, right?" Bald Jeff admitted, "That's right. It was mainly to follow up on the association's related topics. We have no advantage in this area." "Is there a specific conclusion?" Jeff shook his head. "Not yet. There are only phenomena." As he spoke, he brought up the relevant information and organized it a bit before continuing. There are 3 types of phenomena that are more common. First, cultivation speed increases. When an ability user's consciousness successfully stays in the Abyss area and maintains stability, their cultivation speed will have a relatively obvious increase. Second, space-time distortion. Ability users can jump through the Abyss area and transmit energy information. The specific phenomena are somewhat similar to wormholes, warp travel, and so on. It greatly increases the area of control. The third is the mark engraving. Ability users can leave their own unique imprint in the Abyss area, making it easier to locate and use. As long as the first time is successful, the difficulty of the subsequent attempts will be reduced accordingly. It seems that one can strengthen their connection with this area through training. After saying this, Jeff glanced around at all the investors and continued to pull data. In the inner world, the Abyss area is an extremely important offensive and defensive area for high-level ability users, especially those with mental strength. According to research, about 20% of B-class psychic abilities would be executed through the abyssal zone, and it was often their life-saving measure. Among the psychic superhumans, that proportion rose to 72%. Due to the problem of sample collection, the numbers were not particularly accurate, but it was basically confirmed that the highest echelons of the inner world had normalized the attack and defense of the abyssal zone. In fact, that includes us as well. The Deep Blue Walker's formatting domain involved the most advanced part of the domain, and they were also coordinated through it. However, our research and use are all copying and copying, which is still relatively shallow. In this aspect, they can't compare to the ICRC's Group AB. Especially Tian Bang. It said that that guy has already reached the standard of a transcendent by relying on the accumulation of the blood flame order. Sure enough, it's meaningful and beneficial. Wang Ju condensed Jeff's long speech into 6 words. Then he turned to look at Herman. "What do you think Sandalwood City will do in this situation?" Herman's face was cold and he didn't speak. For the various large circles, everything was still a guess for the time being. Luonan didn't mention a single word about the abyssal zone during the lecture in the circular conference room. The topic of his lecture was still the condensation ring. Of course, compared to the beginning of the lecture over an hour ago, the overall atmosphere and mentality were like the difference between heaven and earth. We did some research before. I know that there are many people present who don't understand the structure of the condensation ring. Speaking of which, how many people are participating in tonight's lecture to learn the structure of the condensation ring? Luo Nan asked casually, but the people in the lecture hall didn't dare to treat him lightly. They looked at each other in dismay, and then the non-awakened on both sides of the hall raised their hands one after another. This number wasn't small. It accounted for at least 2/3 of the ability users present. Luo Nan laughed when he saw this. Actually, if you want to learn the condensation ring, the RT-8313 mission post on Headquarters website forum is the best way to do so. Her Majesty Empress Wu's demonstration is undoubtedly on the level of a textbook. At most, we can refer to the contents of last year's training course. That's how I came. At least 10,000 people felt stifled in their hearts at this moment. Fortunately, Luo Nan quickly changed the topic. Since there are so many people staring at the condensation ring, then I'll comply with public opinion. At the end of this lecture, I'll demonstrate the structure of the condensation ring a few more times to everyone. It's the same as giving a guide. Is this fine? Sparse responses rang out in the lecture hall. Most people were stupefied. Didn't he say that he was going to gamble? The focus was on the blood wool ring. Why did he suddenly jump back to the condensation ring? Luo Nan didn't explain too much. He swiped his hand casually, wiping clean the display diagram in the work area. All that was left was the enlarged version of the condensation ring from before. My demonstration this time will be a bit smaller than the condensation ring. I'll shrink it step by step and the process will go from slow to fast. Everyone, please follow me if you can. I'll do my best to take care of everyone. I ask everyone to believe that the condensation ring is an art of simplifying the structure. You must also believe in your own abilities. It really isn't hard to just apply it. Luo Nan extended a finger as he spoke. He didn't make any other movements, but he had already realized the focus of the gazes of over 1,000 people. The group consciousness that had nearly been scattered by ghost eyes coalesced once more. Luo Nan's gaze cut across the live broadcast camera once more. 500 kilometers away, in the studio of the Reading Perspective program, ghost eyes stared intently at the screen of the circular conference room. He maintained an upright sitting posture at the same time. Only his 10 fingers were crossed in front of his chest. Under the pressure of the shadow of death, the program's director played with hand editing at an extraordinary level. He cut the two people on both sides of the gambling table into the same shot. It was as if they were looking at each other from a distance. The atmosphere was off the charts. Now is the first time. A bloody glow flickered in front of Luo Nan's body as he spoke. It was like the outline of a cinnabar brush, but it was also like a silk spider web. It slowly spread out in the void, snaking and shuttling back and forth. In the instant of drawing, Luo Nan's mind flashed with the scene of intersecting curtains on the mental plane. The scene of nodes being woven together flashed in Luo Nan's mind. In a trance, the void rippled and an image was embedded within. But this trance only lasted for an instant. In the eyes of over 1,000 participants and 30,000 spectators, the bloody glow in front of Luo Nan's body twisted and turned naturally. There were no obstructions at all. It was extremely nimble. It was like a lustrous flying insect. It fluttered and flowed in the void. The bloody threads of light were the flying insect's dancing trajectories. If one said that it was fast, then each trajectory was slowly drawn and clear. If one said that it was slow, then it was concise and transparent. It was not sloppy at all. Gradually, many people forgot that Luo Nan was carrying out the drawing of a configuration. They only treated it as a dazzling display of skill. In fact, Luo Nan's demonstration this time really wasn't playing for real. It was just another display of an enlarged version of the model. Although the drawing wasn't finished, it was still the size of a human head. Seeing with your eyes and seeing with your heart are different. Just like right now. The rules and laws in my heart are completely different from what appears on the outside. Luo Nan explained in a soft voice as the lines were drawn. His words were mysterious, but they were sincere. Right now, he didn't even have a general idea of the condensation ring in his mind. He only had the curtains in the deep void of his mind. Before it was the blood wool ring. Now it was the condensation ring. The latter's node structure was clearly more complex than the blood wool ring. But when one carefully examined the origins of the curtains, they were all classified in the same way. One type originated from the bottom of the self. One type originated from the boundless heaven and earth. The last type originated from the intersection of heaven and earth. There was a vague picture of the three formats of self, society, and heaven and earth. The convergence of the three formats was the node. The exhibit, which was as large as a human head, didn't conform to the requirements of the configuration in terms of form. But in the unseen world it still followed the true and not false law. Luo Nan could vaguely sense that this method of construction was the deeper mystery of the configuration. If he continued to extend it, it was very likely that he would use this opportunity to take a look at the condensation ring's mode of action on the microscopic level. He would use a special method to bypass the limits of his sensory precision and truly understand its essence. Unfortunately, he was still in class right now. He didn't have the energy to delve deeper. He could only do things more clearly and intuitively. Within the deep void of his mind, the node structures of the condensation ring and the blood will ring appeared at the same time. The two configuration nodes converged together according to his will. The two nodes were slightly distorted, but the direction of the origin of the curtains as well as the mode of construction always converged together. The principle didn't change. Under the suppression of the solid configuration principle, the two converging nodes maintained stability. They seemed to fuse together, but their layers were distinct. With such a stable configuration principle and foundation, Luo Nan poured his strength layer by layer. It was like a river flowing into a canal. It divided and watered. It seeped into the soil and penetrated the roots. The thickness was all right. In fact, Luo Nan's strength was no more than a primer. As his first demonstration came to an end, the dancing firefly left behind a bright red trajectory that was deeply engraved in the minds of the majority of the participants. It drew out wisps of subtle psychic power, strands after strand, and converged into a stream. There seemed to be a gurgling sound in the air. It was very faint, like an illusion. It seemed to circulate in the depths of everyone's heart. Beep. Chapter 571. Ouch. Gao Meng subconsciously crushed the paper talisman in his hand into scrap paper. This was already the second time. The last time was when the picture of the iron hoop was presented. Jin Tong's life and death were of course very important, but as a cultivator and a veteran psychic ability user, he couldn't afford to be distracted when it came to high-level topics like the Abyss region. From Gao Meng's perspective, Luo Nan and Ghost Eye's gamble was clearly based on the criteria of entering the Abyss region and successfully staying there. However, there was an unavoidable prerequisite. Gao Meng wouldn't even blink if Luo Nan was able to enter the Abyss region. He subconsciously regarded Luo Nan as one of the most powerful psychic ability users. But from Luo Nan's words, it seemed that he was going to make a huge news. It was hard not to feel uneasy thinking too much. Gao Meng moved to Ouyang Chen's side and stared closely at every change in the system data. The AI's report made Gao Meng's scalp go numb, but he was a bit doubtful when he saw the value. Too small. Is it a miscalculation? The value is meaningless. Ouyang Chen's 10 fingers interlaced to cover his lips. His voice was a bit vague, but his expression was extremely focused. Gao Meng also knew this. Entering the Abyss region with soul strength was a very complicated process. Interference, engraving, observation. All sorts of methods were possible. It was very difficult to have a quantitative standard, and it was even more difficult to express it using secular measurement units. The psychic wave network of Xia City used the temporary standard of headquarters. The value was only for reference. It was more of a question of whether or not it existed. The key was that it was very difficult for a B-rank ability user to observe and grasp such a low value. Did it exist or not? Did Luo Nan enter by himself or did the gamble require it? He was really anxious to death. In the end, he couldn't hold back and forcefully slapped Ouyang Chen's shoulder. Hey Ouyang. Give me a definite answer. Ouyang Chen calmly said, the answer of the psychic wave network is my answer. Gao Meng's eyebrows jumped twice. Luo Nan's first demonstration had already ended in the circular conference room. There was chatter on the internet. There were all sorts of things being said, but the conference room was abnormally silent. The bright trajectory remained in the eyes and hearts of most people. Luo Nan's voice broke the strange atmosphere. You should have some idea now. There weren't many people who responded, but Luo Nan didn't care. He casually explained a few of the difficulties that needed to be paid attention to when sketching his consciousness. The structure of the condensation ring wasn't too complicated, but it still had a few more checkpoints than the blood intent ring. Luonan didn't expect the several hundred amateurs present to be able to solve everything on their first try. Just as he said, all you have to do is get used to it, get used to this trajectory, get used to my guidance, get used to this pattern. If it had been an hour ago, such a straightforward and old-fashioned way of speaking would have been met with boos. But now, at least in the circular conference room, no one dared to say anything. The atmosphere was solemn and heavy. What Luonan did not tell the attendees was that the blood intent ring, which had been hidden behind the scenes, was still playing a more crucial role than the guided learning of the condensation ring's structure. Its simple and basic module and cycle structure were the pathways through which the energy and information volatilized by the participants operated. At this time, people's consciousness space was scattered and overlapped. Under the guidance of the module structure, they were arranged neatly and returned to their respective positions. There was overlap and cooperation, but there was very little conflict and internal friction. Luonan's blood intent ring structure, consisting of 256 sets and 512 pieces, was the most complex in the entire venue. Right now he had the authority to lead. He was driving the group consciousness to start at a low gear. He wasn't in a hurry to change gears. Instead he was accumulating power layer by layer. The attention of nearly 1,500 people present was becoming more and more stable. It was the equivalent of increasing the speed of rotation, maintaining a stable and gentle output. Of course, the condensation ring was the target of concentration. Its function was very important. The two ring-shaped nodes had already been completely docked. The potential development of the interaction between them had just begun. Focus your mind. Let's do it a second time. Luonan didn't give the first wave of exhibits too much time to survive. He wiped them away with a casual swipe of his hand, and then he started over again. This time it was a bit smaller than last time and the speed was a bit faster. However, not a single person raised the issue of being unable to keep up until the end of this demonstration. Luonan was still explaining after the second demonstration was completed. The content of his lecture was the same as the first time, but it was different. There was an emphasis here and there were hints and explanations for other segments. The attendees present listened attentively. No one felt that Luonan was long-winded. They just felt that Luonan's every word was able to hit the bottom of their hearts. This really is. Xianxia was an awakened after all. Her strength was guaranteed. She had no problems with the relevant understanding. Her thoughts were a bit scattered right now. She had some feelings. She was in the best position. She could see every detail of Luonan on the podium in a panoramic manner. But in the last few minutes, there was nothing else in her eyes but that blood-red trajectory. This feeling was extremely marvelous. Xianxia wanted to speak in the live broadcast room, but she inexplicably didn't dare to disturb the silence of the venue. She typed out a paragraph of text, something she rarely did. Friends who aren't present here might find it hard to understand the atmosphere of the venue. Whether your eyes are open or closed, there will always be blood-red strokes spinning in front of your eyes. All you need to do is focus your mind and you will be able to follow the strokes. It's just like when my parents held my hand and taught me how to write when I was young. I can barely write now, but the memories of that feeling are still there. It's like there really is someone holding my hand and guiding my attention. Even my thoughts. She paused for a moment and habitually used the word astonished. It looks inconceivable at first glance, but I shudder at the thought of it. But she felt that it was inappropriate after these words appeared on the screen. She added another paragraph to compensate. But I still can't help but want to learn. This is because the blood-red trajectory floating in the air is truly exquisite, beautiful and perfect. It's as if the condensation ring should be like this. Its configuration should be like this. Perhaps my will isn't to bend my knees to Luonan, but to salute to the truth. She didn't even have the time to look at the audience's response after she sent these few paragraphs of text. She saw Luonan raise his hand on the stage. Third time. Xianxia immediately tossed everything aside. She placed all her attention on the blood-red trajectory that was gradually taking shape. However, the participants, including her and Long 7 who were preoccupied with other things, were completely unaware that the model of the condensation ring had actually shrunk by a large margin. The current scale could already be constructed and used normally. In other words, it had leaped into the millimeter scale. The consciousness of the participants had already unwittingly broken through the barrier between the material and the mental. Everything they saw, felt, and knew blended together, becoming indistinguishable from one another. Only the viewers online discovered this point. They could no longer see the condensation ring. Many people reminded, shouted and complained, but Zhangji did not respond at all. Only the live broadcast camera and the spy equipment continued to work with the help of artificial intelligence, transmitting every detail of the scene to the entire world. A faint gurgling sound rang out in the air once more. This time it was no longer an illusion. It was real. And it was at this moment that the live broadcast screen inexplicably turned hazy. A layer of rippling light faintly appeared on the screen, and thin smoke appeared in the room at some unknown time. The smoke weaved into a crisscross web and then spread out. Hiss. Gao Meng didn't know whether he should feel regret or rejoice. Due to the bet between Luo Nan and Ghost Eye, he was unable to participate in the experiments of the blood intent ring and the condensation ring due to his duty. But if he were to enter, how would he be able to see such a marvelous scene? The value displayed by the warning module hovered around the 1000th percentile, but the staff member reported other key data. The model conversion ratio is 59. 2%. The interference rate is 5. 2%. 5. 7%. It has broken through 6. And it's still rising. The speed at which the data rose exceeded the speed of speech. The interference rate of the SVIP-09 model had already broken through 7 before the staff member's voice had even faded away. And the momentum of the increase was extremely fierce. Gao Meng's gaze was locked onto the data, but the speed at which his brain spun was unable to keep up. He subconsciously said, "The model conversion ratio is too low." Ouyang Chen nodded slightly and immediately gave an order. Connect SVIP-06. Adjust according to the sniffing results. Confirm the combination. Automatic correction. SVIP-06 model was the dripping sword created by Her Majesty Empress Wu. Just 5 seconds after Ouyang Chen gave the order, the conversion ratio of the combination of the two models jumped to 94%. And it was still rising slightly. Looking at the interior of the circular conference room, the water vapor was like a thin mist, but it had a texture that mist did not possess. It undulated in the void like a delicate gauze tent swaying in the wind. It was in contact with everyone in the conference room, but it was also faintly independent, forming its own law. Is this the effect of the condensation ring? Gao Meng felt that it didn't seem like it, but after some thought he felt that it was very normal. It really is a fusion of two rings. Does this count as SVIP-10? If this counts, I'm afraid I won't be able to make it. Ouyang Chen pushed up his glasses. His expression was much more relaxed. He smiled and said, "Bloody will ring, this name is too casual. How about 100 connect ring?" Gao Meng choked. His logic was correct. You mean to say that this is a super support and it has the effect of a buff halo? I think it's more like an incubator, a greenhouse. Then let's call it Bloody will ring. At the same time, Gao Meng saw that the interference rate had already reached 10%. In other words, the interference power of the current integrated model was enough to support a decent battle. As for the abyssal region, the measured value could only be said to be stable. There were almost no fluctuations. If it existed, it could only be described as a bud. The question was, did it really exist? Up until now, Gao Meng himself could not sense it. As for what the extraordinaries thought, 500 kilometers away in the studio of the Viewing Physiognomy program, Ghost Eye was still sitting upright. However, his interlaced fingers had been gently flicking since 10 seconds ago and had gradually gained a rhythm. The beautiful host, Dan E, had wanted to interrupt and find an explosive point. But the moment she turned her head, she was unconsciously dazzled by Ghost Eye's withered fingers. When she came back to her senses, she saw that his hands had already formed a stable and strange hand seal. At the same time, Ghost Eye raised his head. Their gazes met and Dan E felt a chill run down her spine. It was as if she was completely exposed in front of someone and then pierced by an invisible sharp blade. The blade followed along her muscles, blood vessels and muscles and was sliced apart. She could hear the sound of a blade slicing through flesh and bone, and also the chirping of ghosts penetrating her heart and mind. After that, her mind was completely blank. There was only an instinctive shudder and fear that instantly enveloped her entire body. Chapter 572. The alert system of the abyssal region sounded once more. This time there was no need. Ghost Eye exerted force, and it was as if fireworks had been set off overhead. The ghostly flames flickered and extinguished in the abyssal region. The fear and awe that Dan E suffered was child's play. Even if a mental-type extraordinary exerted force did not interfere with the material plane, the pressure it exerted in the mental domain was enough to affect all ability users in the relevant areas. This included the ordinary people of the secular world who were unaware of it. There was nothing to be done. Even extraordinaries could not treat a distance of 500 kilometers lightly. They had to fully utilize the environment of the abyssal region and forcefully distort space and time in order to effectively touch it. In this way, it was simply an impossible task to perform a technique that did not contain any smoke or fire. At least 100 million people in Xia City will have nightmares tonight. Gao Meng took out a paper talisman and twirled it between his fingers. Under normal circumstances, Xia City was guarded by two great extraordinaries. Ghost Eye's straightforward and direct attack would have pushed him back into the sea before he could even reach the shore. But Luo Nan had made a bet with someone else. Not to mention Ouyang Qin, even Her Majesty Empress, who had no reaction. Clearly they had tacitly agreed. Oh, it wasn't just that. Ouyang Qin gave another order at this time. SVIP-09 model preparing to detach. Execute in 30 seconds. Gao Meng crushed the paper talisman again. He didn't have the time to feel sorry for it. He went up and pressed down on Ouyang Chen's arm. What are you doing? Why do you want it to detach? Ouyang Chen answered, it just so happens that Ghost Eye is about to enter the battlefield. Let him accept his defeat wholeheartedly. Gao Meng looked at the back of Ouyang Chen's head as if he was an idiot. Did you take drugs? Ouyang Chen turned his face and a smile blossomed. What I mean is that the blood will ring has taken shape and can already operate independently. The support of the psychic wave network is meaningless. Really? From beginning to end, it only needs a medium or springboard. Even without the psychic wave network, a simple amplification device is enough. This is its marvelous aspect. Also, the current flow of energy and information in the blood will ring is actually separated by the psychic wave network. Only by detaching the psychic wave network can it fuse into one. Gao Meng grunted in acknowledgement. He finally remembered that in class, many people didn't have enough ability and needed to use the psychic wave network as a support to form the structure of the blood will ring. But correspondingly, there were quite a number of people who didn't need such support. After the psychic wave network was opened, a portion of the people entered it, but there were also some who were too lazy to do so. Under such circumstances, it was a small miracle that the ring of blood will could still operate without any problems. He did not ask any more technical questions. Instead, he fixed his gaze on Ouyang. By the way, Ouyang, aren't you a little excited? Otherwise, it was rare for him to be so proactive. Without waiting for Ouyang Chen's reply, the Abyss region's warning system had already displayed the latest detection results. Standard unit of force in Gully region. This was the power of the Ghost Eye's suppression. Due to the complex calculation standards and different application methods, it was difficult to use secular standards to convert. However, Gao Meng knew that even if he exerted his full strength and used the most explosive means, the measured value would not exceed 3 standard units, and that was only the instantaneous limit. The Ghost Eye was able to maintain a value of over 10 even at a distance of 500 kilometers. This was an insurmountable gap in terms of level and realm. Its corresponding powerful force had the function of repelling all external imprints and power. Gao Meng's soul strength had only circled around the periphery of the Abyss region when he felt the chirping of ghosts seep into his soul. Half of his skull went cold. Mother ***. He's playing for real. Ouyang Chen grunted. He's always been very serious. Gao Meng looked at the value on the other end. The spinning thousandths and the even more glaring 0 made the other half of his skull throb with pain. Luo Nan had already finished his third demonstration within the circular conference room. He didn't need to demonstrate anymore. There were 1,477 people in the conference room. There were already 1,469 people who had entered the force field of the Ring of Blood Will. They revolved around the condensation ring and continued to use their consciousness. There were still 8 people left. Their abilities were lacking, and their attention had been broken by Ghost Eye and the chaotic battle online. In the end, they weren't able to catch the last bus. They had already been excluded. Luo Nan wasn't willing to let them disturb the state of the others, so he used hypnosis to knock them out and marked out their seat numbers. He turned his head to greet He Yuan, who was frowning in silence, and asked her to help handle the situation. He Yuan silently stood up. She gave him a rare glare and said in a low voice, "Don't get distracted." She informed the security team backstage as she spoke, ordering them to make preparations to deal with any accidents. Luonan smiled. His finger streaked across worker Zhai, who was next to He Yuan, the group of friends and relatives in the front row, and even the entire quiet conference room. "As long as they don't get distracted, we'll win." Luonan had clearly forgotten at this time that there were still 30,000 people outside the conference room who had already entered the Ring of Blood well. They could see the situation on the stage through the live broadcast camera. The spectators, who had been forcefully excluded from the scope of the lecture 3 minutes ago, exploded with resentment. The live broadcast room was instantly bathed in blood. "Professor Luo has raised a good flag. Lord Ghost Eye, you're being looked down upon. Show off. Brag until the explosion. Sit and wait for the explosion. Explosion +1. Explosion +2. Explosion +10086. The resentment of the spectators had already taken effect on the illusory thundercloud within the electromagnetic field. Luonan's consciousness cut through it, but he didn't care. Rather than paying attention to this, it was better to take a look at the effects of the Ring of Blood will. As for Ghostly Chirp, who was already shuttling through the curtain of night in Xia City. "See you in a bit." The Ring of Blood will had constructed a complete force field. The solid foundation of the configuration was already in place. Luonan's guidance was complete. Flowing water poured into the canal constructed by the Ring of Blood will in an unending stream, raising the water level within the canal. Was this flowing water the sole strength of the people in the room? Not entirely. From Luonan's perspective, the complete driving force should include the overlapping consciousness of over 1,000 people. It came from over 1,000 people surrounding the condensation ring, a single goal, consciously and unconsciously participating with their wisdom. Every time Luonan sketched out a detail, over 1,000 people would imitate it. And the imitations of these over 1,000 people were all different. Originally, it was impossible to share these experiences with others. But in the marvelous environment constructed by the Ring of Blood will, in front of a clear and focused target, all the impossibilities became possible. This was just like when Luonan first practiced with the condensation ring. It was a one-time large-scale high-volume output, screening and comparison. In the environment constructed by the Ring of Blood will, this output, screening and comparison was amplified several dozen times over. Even if the quality of each individual wasn't excellent, Luonan had established a stable and high-quality structure. They already had an excellent direction, a reasonable arrangement of ranks, and a highly efficient mode of operation. Luonan could discard the vast majority of meaningless and trashy thoughts. This was like an enormous cooperative cloud space. It was a supercomputer pieced together by pure manpower. Luonan's consistent guidance over a long period of time finally allowed the group of 1,400 people to form a stable group consciousness. It was a structure that could efficiently utilize the latent potential within them. In a certain sense, people didn't lack power. They just lacked the understanding to properly apply power. When the consciousness of 1,000 people in the Ring of Blood will reached a consensus, the final bit of running in work was completed. This result came from the hearts of everyone, but it also transcended everyone. They successfully constructed it out of nothingness. From nothing to something, from small to large, from fabricated to real. Perhaps it was still extremely weak in nature, in danger of collapse at any time. But this result was under the protection of the Ring of Blood will. It was within an incorporeal yet spacious fortress. Alright, I nearly forgot to tell you. The name of the Ring of Blood will in the virtual brain system was Fortress. Zhangji was a bit absent-minded right now, but she also had some understanding. She had once been to the largest and only spaceport in the solar system, Ceres Base. That was the home port of the Space Defense Fleet. It was the largest man-made celestial body ever constructed in the history of humanity. The base could accommodate 20 different types of space shuttles at the same time. There were over 20,000 soldiers stationed there. When she stayed at Ceres Base and faced the vast and boundless universe, she could always feel her own weakness and insignificance. She was exceptionally moved and treasured it. Now she felt like she was once again at Ceres Base, facing the dark sky that could devour souls. The man-made fortress was both majestic and small, but it was the source of confidence and the only thing she could rely on. The only difference was that she was no longer a tourist, but an indispensable member of the fortress. She had her own position and her own responsibilities. She was an indispensable part of the fortress operating system. It was at this moment, under the joint efforts of hundreds and thousands of comrades like her, that the cold and lifeless fortress was turned on one after another. The power source, transmission pipes, functional areas and modules were brightly lit. The fortress came to life. It was like a living body. She could even feel the strong life energy flowing through the blood. She received this energy and injected her own strength into it, forming a perfect conduction that pushed it higher and higher. Finally, the pushing force passed a certain threshold and the powerful pushing force acted on it. The current Zhangji instantly returned. She saw her body that was as solid as a statue, and she also saw everyone else who was in the same position as her. Of course, there was also the swirling mist muslin that was floating up and down in a lively manner. Perhaps she was a bit flustered for a moment, but this slight change in her mind was no longer able to resist the powerful driving force. All stray thoughts were annihilated like smoke in a puff of smoke. Only Luo Nan's clear instructions penetrated her heart and entered her brain, forming the only thing she could rely on. Chapter 573. Beep 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 beep. The early warning system of the Abyss region emitted a sharp and urgent alarm. The distorted lines and colors on the direct view of the force field seemed to have evolved into a storm. Although the Abyss region itself was a never-ending storm tide, the entry of Ghost Eye's extraordinary power brought about an even more chaotic and berserk attack. Ouyang held his chin as he evaluated the destructive power of this storm. He heard someone mumbling behind him. Listening carefully, it sounded like someone was counting, 6, 7, 8, 9. What are you doing? It's time. Ghost Eye has already made his move. The standard of 15 seconds can't be wrong. It hasn't started yet. Why hasn't it started yet? The chilly wind is howling in anger. It hasn't blown in yet. Ouyang pulled out the validation standards for the effectiveness of the Abyss region for Gao Meng to see. Although headquarters was often unreliable, the logic of these basic regulations was still relatively strict. The so-called 15 seconds that Gao Meng mentioned and the 60 seconds that Luo Nan had included in the wager were actually a set of standards. It referred to when the power projected into the Abyss region reached or approached one standard unit without any obvious interference and maintained relative stability for 60 seconds. The power maintained relative stability under the battle level attack for 15 seconds. The lower limit of the force fluctuation was no less than 0. 1 standard unit. If this standard was met, then it proved that this person possessed the ability to explore the Abyss region and use it effectively. This person could be ranked among the ranks of first-rate psychic ability users. Of course, Luo Nan wasn't testing Ghost Eye himself. Instead, he was testing Ghost Eye's ability to control people's hearts and gather the power of over 1,000 people to form the blood intent ring. But the principle was the same. Ghost Eye is very restrained right now. Restrained? The hostess over there is so scared she peed her pants. A 500-kilometer attack is considered 1,000 kilometers in ancient times. Even you, Master Gao, would have to burn incense, bathe and open an altar. At the very least, Ghost Eye hasn't done anything to the Shangding building's surroundings. It's a different story if you insist on going there. Hey, where in the world are you from? Ouyang adjusted his glasses and laughed calmly. My heart has always belonged to logic and truth. Before Gao Meng could hammer him, Ouyang raised a finger. What's the value of Luo Nan's work right now? Gao Meng shot a glance. Oh, the 1,000th point is 7. But according to this standard, Ghost Eye can choose not to come. Oh. Gao Meng stared blankly for a moment before coming to a realization. As long as Luo Nan's work was unable to reach or approach one standard unit in the Abyss region, then Ghost Eye could simply ignore it according to the verification standard requirements. Luo Nan's gamble would be lost without a fight. Of course, other than the standard unit itself, the only ambiguous expression in the verification standard was the word close. This was also a manual correction of the ambiguity of the standard unit. Numerically, it was in the range of 0.7 to 1. In the specific implementation process, some parameters could also be adjusted. However, The basic condition for the parameter adjustment was to be able to make contact with the verifier in the Abyss area. In other words, the effect of Luo Nan's work in the Abyss region could be maintained at the level of 0.27 dg as long as he could make contact with the ghost eye and let the ghost eye confirm its existence. But this way, the difference between 60 seconds and 15 seconds would be blurred. This way, ghost eye had a lot of room to maneuver. When faced with this kind of situation, shouldn't that uncouth old man just chuckle and wave his hand in a light and breezy manner? Shouldn't he say, "Well done, well done"? Wouldn't that suffocate the other party to death? But Ghost Eye still came, and he went all out as soon as he came. He displayed a meticulous and earnest energy, and he had an imposing manner that was determined to win. This was a bit too far from his uncouth persona. Gao Meng furrowed his brows in thought. Ouyang Chen's chat time was about to end. He turned his head and continued to dispatch the maintenance team. They carried out a comprehensive and detailed monitoring of this confrontation that had yet to occur. In the end, he said, "In this gamble, the time standard is actually meaningless. Whether it's Luo Nan or Ghost Eye, they don't really want to win anything from each other. The so-called extraordinary photograph was just a joke. All they want is a verification. A verification of yes and no, yes and no. Does the blood intent ring exist?" Even Gao Meng himself didn't believe these words. Does the new road sign exist? Does the new road sign exist? It was rare for Ouyang Chen to sigh with emotion. Gao Meng suddenly gave him a fierce shove from behind. Look. It's going up. It's going up. Only Luo Nan's work could make Gao Meng react like this. Right now, on the value, the 1,000th, which had been fluctuating all this time, showed no signs of stopping. However, the higher percentile began to change as well. It went from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. It went up all the way. Just as Gao Meng's voice fell, the value of 10, which had been at 0 all this time, was finally replaced by a value of 1. The change in the value of 10 wasn't as frequent as the percentile and the 1,000th, but Gao Meng counted in his mind. He had just counted to 5 and the 1 had become a 2. Another 5 and the 2 had become a 3. In this way, every 5 digits represented an increase. In a short half a minute, the corresponding value had already risen to 0.713. The momentum was strong and the increase was stable. It was simply like watching a third-rate stock market war drama. Gao Meng was still yelling, but he subconsciously pinched his throat, afraid that if he breathed too much he would blow away this dreamlike scene. "Do you have to be so awesome? This is already in line with the standard, right?" Ouyang Chen grunted. He was so focused that he didn't give any response. Gao Meng wanted to push Ouyang Chen's shoulder again, but before he could exert force, he realized that he could completely sense the value within this range. His thoughts turned and he thought of the shadow cast by Ghost Eye above the abyssal region. His palm shrunk slightly and he pulled out a paper talisman. He immediately burned it and his mind followed the curling green smoke to evaporate. Gao Meng felt his scalp go cold as soon as he emerged from the abyssal region. His heart sank. Admittedly, Ghost Eye had managed a great scene in the abyssal region under unrestricted circumstances. But in the surroundings, even in the deeper regions that he was powerless to explore, there existed a few faintly familiar intents. They used various methods to observe the current focal point. MD. Gao Meng cursed. Forget about Her Majesty Empress Wu. But what's Tianbang and the others doing? And there's also Mountain Lord and Star Shaman. They've been eating dust outside the city for quite a few days. They haven't been able to come in for a cup of tea. It's normal for them to be resentful. The two people Ouyang Chen spoke of were the two extraordinaries in the outskirts of Xia City. Their purpose in coming was no different from Jin Tong, who had practically entered the gates of hell. Previously, Xia City had been sealed off at every level, not allowing ability users to enter. They were afraid of Ouyang Chen and Her Majesty Empress Wu. They didn't want to immediately shed all pretenses of cordiality, so they didn't do anything. But now that Luo Nan and Ghost Eye were making a bet, Xia City had opened its mouth. They came in with a face full of saliva. This could be considered as hitting the edge. This isn't fair. Gao Meng fiercely hammered Ouyang Chen's shoulder as if he was hammering the table in protest. "You extraordinaries are playing basketball in the abyssal region. Have you ever thought about Luo Nan's feelings?" Ouyang Chen shrugged. Right now, the upward curve of the blood intent ring is clear. It doesn't show any signs of weakening. The construction of the laws should be extremely stable. Right now it's in a high-speed growth period of the formation of the mark. How beautiful. Hey. This is a true architect of the abyssal region. He has constructed his own work in the abyssal region. Piece after piece, layer after layer. For a psychic, after completing the foundation of the body and soul structure and leaving the abyssal region, though there is a grand goal in front of them, they have their feet on the ground and concentrate on basic work. Cough. Ouyang, you've said these words too many times in the past. But there are far too few good examples. Right now this is probably the best example. Ouyang Qin continued to cross his fingers and support his chin. He focused on watching the numerical changes in the projected work area, as well as the visual rendering of the force field. It was like he was watching an incomparable masterpiece, the live drawing process. Luo Nan didn't have the self-awareness of drawing a masterpiece. He felt that he was more like a rookie ship captain, leading a group of rookie soldiers into the deep space of the universe where danger lurked on every side. However, this analogy wasn't accurate. Using another inaccurate analogy to describe it, when a space fortress was activated, what appeared on the outside was not a shift in space. Instead, it was a kind of transition in the energy level. There was no process of going up into the heavens or down into the sea. There was just a transition in the energy level. From the colorful and bewildering turbid flow of the mental to the mysterious and unpredictable location of the abyssal region. Then what bombarded the group consciousness of over 1,000 people within the fortress was the endless energy storm within the abyssal region. Luo Nan rarely entered the abyssal region in the past. On one hand, it was because his starting point was too high. The human-faced arachnid brought him to the deepest and highest place the moment he made contact with the mental plane. He was practically above everyone else. On the other hand, it was because the abyssal region gave him an overly chaotic feeling. It was restless all the time. From the perspective of the curtain at first, this was the area where the curtain twisted the most intensely. But from a more comprehensive perspective now, this was simply a storm maze that could tear a person to shreds at any time. Luo Nan relied on pure observation to make a living in the past. He had nothing better to do, so he went here to torment himself. But as his understanding continued to deepen and his cultivation continued to grow, he came to a deeper understanding. Even though the abyssal region was chaotic, it also contained inconceivable resources. It was just like how the deep sea was dangerous, but it also contained rich mineral deposits. Even though the deep space was deathly still, it was filled with even purer energy. For ability users, especially mental ability users, the environment they normally lived in was 1 and 2 was 2. It was very difficult to create miracles. But the abyssal region was different. This place was an extremely dangerous treasure trove that contained miracles. For the sake of improving their cultivation, increasing their realm and accumulating capital, they thought of every method possible in hopes of breaking through the barrier of the mental plane. They entered this place and gambled with their lives. Chapter 574. The force field of the Ring of Blood will lingered in the abyss area, as weak as a sprout that had just broken through the soil. But things like sprouts were the toughest because there were spreading roots below it, constantly absorbing nutrients and supplying its needs. The interweaving of spiritual light and wisdom of thousands of people, as well as the infusing of life energy from time to time, was enough to last for a while under the premise that it was used effectively. Moreover, the external environment of this sprout was admittedly still a raging storm, but at the same time, there was also a surge of energy that was as pure as sunlight. The method was a little violent, but it was good that he could absorb it. The structure of the Ring of Blood will ensure the basic efficiency of absorption and maintain the balance of the supply of nutrients from top to bottom. This process had already begun long before Luo Nan and Ghost Eye made their bet. It had already begun when the Ring of Blood intent was first constructed. It was just that Luo Nan had been the one to protect and maintain it at the time. It couldn't be considered self-sufficient. Only when the 1,469 people entered the circular conference room and became the recruits that supported the operation of the fortress did this sprout truly take shape. And under Luo Nan's clear goals and strategies, the sprout wasn't prepared to immediately become a towering tree after it took shape. It just built a foundation bit by bit, strengthened its roots, and used a steady and conservative method to gradually deepen its imprint in the abyssal region, expanding its domain. In this way, no matter how much the storm in the abyss region raged, it could no longer be destroyed under normal conditions. A simple and clear mark was engraved on it and gradually deepened. Unfortunately, within the space fortress that Luonan commanded and controlled, the only one who could truly experience the beauty of this balance of violence and gentleness was him, the captain. The remaining rookies did not have the ability to pull their consciousness out of the cloud space formed by the ring of blood and will. They still needed to familiarize themselves with the new environment, the new pressure and the new functional conditions. Luonan was responsible for giving them directions and cutting down some unnecessary branches. Oh, forgive him for coming to a conclusion a little too soon. Inside the force field of the ring of blood will, a few hazy consciousnesses were like early maturing silkworms, nurturing or awakening spiritual lights in the chaos. Even if it hadn't broken out of its chrysalis and become a butterfly, it would only be a matter of a few rounds of stimulation. Which of them had extraordinary aptitudes? Or was it because of the ring of blood will? Or could it be that he, as a teacher who was forcing a duck onto a perch, had an outstanding teaching effect? Luonan walked a few steps on the podium before suddenly laughing out loud. Just as his smile blossomed, the airflow outside the building suddenly became intense. Together with tiny water droplets, they hit the windows and the walls, forming a restless note. It was as if a ghost hiding in the night was pounding on the door. Now that the demon eye had arrived, the storm in the real world was only a greeting. The energy flow in the abyss region instantly became 10 times more restless. This was the prelude to the true attack. An extraordinary might not be able to do as he pleased in the abyss region, but his attack power against specific areas and targets was absolutely formidable. For example, Ghost Eye's attack was only aimed at the force field of the ring of blood in the abyss region. The job of destroying the tender sprouts? Obviously not. As an experienced transcendent, Ghost Eye's methods were both experienced and direct. As the energy flow of the abyss region bombarded the force field of the ring of blood will, there was an even more incorporeal yet profound power. It was like a chilly wind blowing from a crack. It penetrated in from every direction, every angle, and every level in an attempt to directly attack the roots. According to Luonan's cage theory, Ghost Eye was using the power of the abyss region to invade the space of consciousness of Luonan and the others. He was taking advantage of the situation to break through the barrier between the mental and material planes, digging the soil and digging the roots. This was an open and above-board attack without holding anything back. It was undoubtedly a method of the extraordinary level. However, Ghost Eye's methods were ultimately unable to touch the upper limits of the Ring of Blood Will's defensive power. From Luonan's perspective, the node of the fusion of the two rings had already taken shape within the mental deep space. It was constantly perfecting itself under the new environment, under the self-conscious correction of the cloud space. In contrast, Ghost Eye's extraordinary power was already an arrow at the end of its flight after crossing 500 kilometers. The projection of the node above the open sea had already shown clear deformations. Even though Ghost Eye was very experienced in making corrections, even going so far as to stimulate the fear in the subconscious minds of the residents of Xia City to form a beneficial environment, Ghost Eye was unable to completely make up for the attenuation brought about by the spatial barrier. As for Ghost Eye's method of digging the roots, the essence of the Ring of Blood Will's function was that of a fortress. Its defensive power was top-notch and it didn't give any flaws or opportunities to take advantage of. Luonan's defense was impenetrable in this confrontation of pure structural laws. Unless Ghost Eye was willing to give up his skin and ruthlessly deal a killing blow, he would be able to wipe out nearly 1,500 Xia City ability users in one fell swoop. President Ouyang and Her Majesty Empress Wu would really knock Ghost Eye to the bottom of the sea. Luonan was still pacing back and forth on the podium. The circular conference room was still silent and quiet. Only the floating shisha muslin in the air could be heard. Some areas had disintegrated, and this was the final result of Ghost Eye's first wave of attack. He Yuan had already finished dealing with the eliminated students by now. She walked back to the podium and locked gazes with Luonan. Luonan smiled at her. Speaking of which, the abyss region is quite close to us. He Yuan was already used to Luonan's train of thought that casually jumped out from the heavens. She didn't respond. Her gaze swept over Luonan's body, then she looked at the surrounding area. Are you all right? I'm fine. Really? I'm telling the truth. Luonan's attitude was indeed very honest. His current physical and mental state were pretty good. He was able to experience the attack methods of an extraordinary while pondering over problems. This in itself was a kind of enjoyment. It would be even better if there was someone to exchange a few words with him. Luo Nan saw that He Yuan's tightly locked brows had yet to loosen, and he even consoled her. It's really nothing. It looks like we're separated by a piece of paper, but the standard of that paper isn't thickness. It's dimensionality. Speaking of which, things like conceptual nouns are easy to misinterpret. It's hard to say who might be misled. He Yuan went, yeah. She confirmed with Ouyang Chen during this time, and she received a relatively positive response. Only then did her brows relax a bit. It's best if you stay focused. It's fine. After all, Ghost Eye is testing my work, not me. Luo Nan finally found someone he could communicate with. He didn't want to let go for a time. He slowly strolled to the side of the lectern. He propped himself up with one hand and assumed a more comfortable posture. He complained in a chatty manner. Who in the world came up with the name, 3 levels, 1 district, 1 domain? At first glance it looks like a very deep region. The road is long and dangerous, but it's not the case at all if you truly experience it. Let's not talk about the 3 levels. Don't you think that the Abyss region is too close? The current Abyss region was indeed too close to Luo Nan. It was just as he had said before. Under the powerful impact of Ghost Eye, the distance between the Abyss region and the real world had been compressed to the point that there was only the distance of a piece of paper left. Fortunately, it wasn't thickness. It was dimensionality. Ordinary people would be completely unaware of this, or they would feel as if they were separated by a natural moat. But in the hands of extraordinaries, it was like a piece of thin paper that could be broken through at any time. Walking in the real world was like standing at the edge of a high-temperature furnace, accompanied by destructive power. If Ghost Eye was a bit closer, or if he just flipped the gambling table and killed Luo Nan should have been able to break through this barrier. At that time, the terrifying energy turbulence of the Abyss region would be amplified by a special structure. It would sweep over. Whether it was Luo Nan or the 1,400 people in the circular conference room, they would all be turned to ashes. This was the ability of a mental type extraordinaire. Luo Nan would not deny this point. But was all of this charity from Ghost Eye? Luo Nan didn't think so. It was like he and Ghost Eye were playing chess. Blades flashed and swords flashed on the chessboard, and the players on both sides were quite polite and amiable. Ghost Eye didn't go for the kill and Luo Nan didn't use his full strength. On the gambling level, Ghost Eye was unable to probe the limits of Luo Nan and the Ring of Blood intent under Luo Nan's control. Under the pressure of the destructive power that could break through at any time, the force field of the Ring of Blood intent still stood stably. After the initial destructive power swept through the sprout relied on its sufficiently thick and solid roots to achieve equilibrium with the new destructive environment of the Abyss region. It continued to extract the pure energy within. Though the rate of growth had shrunk by a large margin, it was able to achieve a new stable increase under the new environment. He Yuan had a rough idea of Luo Nan's current situation, which was why she allowed him to be willful. But for the sake of safety, He Yuan still walked 2 steps forward. She maintained a distance from Luo Nan so that she could rescue him at any time. She was like a professional secretary. Her hands drooped down and overlapped on her lower abdomen. She chatted with her boss in a soft voice. After all, we're in a confrontation right now. It's very hard to probe under normal circumstances. Luo Nan recalled for a moment. He could only admit that this was indeed the case. But then again, for an ability user who can probe into the Abyss region, is there really such a big difference between what's normal and what's special? A certain person and his secretary chatted enthusiastically. But from the very beginning, there was no beginning or end to the description. There was a true attitude of treating no one else present. This made the onlookers on the internet unable to stand it. Hey, we're still here. Pretentious bastard, go shit. He really jumped into the Abyss region, but I don't understand a single word. I've had enough. Is there anyone who understands? Didn't they just say 60 seconds and 15 seconds? Has it started yet? Has it passed yet? Host guessed there's no one who can decipher it. Wake up. It's not time to sleep yet. No matter how the group of people yelled, the reality was that the key members of Zhang Ji's broadcast room and the reading physiognomy program team had already become deep participants in this gambling game. They were situated in the most central region of the gambling game. They no longer had the heart to do anything else, even if that was their job. Chapter 575. Motherfucker, what are you all looking at me for? Ari, the only paid guest of John G's live broadcast, really wanted to stay out of this matter. However, the continuous changes in the situation had already caused him to subtly separate from his peers, making him even more eye-catching. As the only live broadcast guest who could interact with the spectators in real time, he didn't even have the time to rejoice that he had escaped a fatal gamble. He had unavoidably become the target of the focus fire. Godar, can you explain? This was a rather polite question. Hey, it's not good to take money and be in a daze, right? This was a rather harsh question. Mr. Honeypot Mommy's boy, what else can you do besides spitting trash talk? If you have the money to raise a little Pekingese, you should at least be loud enough. This was a vendetta. When Ari accepted the position of guest, he never thought that he would end up being cut apart by the host, the other guests, and even the guests of the other programs. The déjà vu of a little transparent creature hiding in a corner and barking suddenly became very intense. He really wanted to say something that would shock everyone. He wanted to insult Luo Nan once more. However, the current conversation on the rostrum in the round conference room was something that only those powerful individuals who were able to fight in the abyss could personally experience in his cognitive system. Of course he could explain, but wouldn't that be the same as licking Luo Nan's stinky feet? Then he really wouldn't release a little Pekingese. Bah! Right at this moment, a clanging sound suddenly rang out from his room. As a B-rank psychic, Ari didn't need to turn his head to know that it was the sound of the curtains that weren't closed properly. The passing hurricane had blown them up, knocking over the furnishings in the living room. Zhangji was located in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It was surrounded on all sides by the sea, so there was a lot of rain. After the Third World War, the global climate changed and a few other factors made this situation more common and more intense. Ari could have ignored it, but he just happened to need a reason to buffer himself from the awkward situation on the internet. Cough. It's raining heavily outside. I'm going to close the window. As he spoke, he forced himself to ignore the comments in the live broadcast room and the forum. He got up and left the range of the camera. After leaving the area, Ari immediately felt his body relax. The cold sweat that he forcibly held back just now poured out. But the problem was, what about after closing the window? What should he do next? Was there a power outage? Before he could think of a way to get out of this predicament, his sensitive mind already knew that the man with the spray bottle was up to something again in the round conference room shown by the live broadcast. Probably because he had been oppressed by the energy turbulence in the abyss and felt a little uncomfortable, that guy played a new trick. He used the condensation ring formed by the thousands of participants he hypnotized to infiltrate the conference room and even outside the Shangding building. Alright, this wasn't some sort of trick, but rather an extremely exquisite operation. It was similar to replacing a peach tree with a peach tree, but it was also like defending against an enemy outside of the country. The impact of Ghost Eye's crushing force was transferred to the thin veil of water mist. There was an additional buffer zone, and there was also too much space for subsequent operations. Ari was in the living room, staring blankly at the curtains that were fluttering in the wind. She was not in the mood to clean up the messy living room. In fact, this kind of thing was naturally handled by the AI butler. It was not up to him. His body was idle, but his mind was in a mess. Ari was also a grade B expert and had a good teacher. Her cultivation and knowledge were not ordinary. Of course, she knew that this move of Luo Nan's looked simple and clear logically, but in reality it was very difficult. When she was in a good state, she was also able to stay and cultivate in the abyss. But when it came to actual combat, it was already quite good to be able to hold on for 60 seconds of eruption. And in these 60 seconds she could only go straight against Ghost Eye. It was impossible to be like Luo Nan, to be in a deadlock with Ghost Eye, or even to create changes during this time. This move of Luo Nan's already involved the effective use of the environment in the abyss. According to Gong Qi's words, this could not be done without the power of a domain. Ari was more and more afraid to return to the live broadcast room. There was only one thought left in her absent-minded mind. What else can Luo Nan do? What else can I do? Luo Nan also had this question in his heart. The game with Ghost Eye in the abyss concerned the outcome of the bet, but it was not within the scope of his concern. In fact, whether it was the standard verification of 60 seconds or 15 seconds, he had already passed long ago. The reason why the two sides were still confronting each other in the abyss wasn't because Ghost Eye was thick-skinned. It was because Luonan was shameless. As mentioned before, it was really rare to have such a high-level, capable and proper sparring partner. Ever since Ghost Eye's long-range attack across space, various magical abilities and methods were equivalent to the basic attack patterns of extraordinaries in the abyss. One by one they appeared before Luonan's eyes. The truth was quite consistent with Luonan's expectations. Luonan was no longer a rookie who had just stepped into the inner world. Even though it had been less than 3 months at most, the high-level battles he had experienced during this time had already surpassed the sum total of many ability users in their entire lives. The logic world of Frost River reality, the planar crossbow of Ku Wang's communication, and the direct assassination of Jin Tong in the Outer Sea. There were as many as 3 confrontations that extraordinaries had directly participated in. In particular, he himself was sinking deeper and deeper. Whether active or passive, he had accumulated a wealth of precious experience. He had a clear reference. In addition, he could see the entire picture of the abyss and the polar regions. He could also see the rules of the twisting curtains. He could see not only the scenery but also the skill. Several reasons were stacked together. When Ghost Eye made his move, Luonan immediately found a reference in his memories. He sorted out the corresponding rules and verified the thoughts in his heart. Sure enough, whether it was President Ouyang's logic world, Luo Yuan's planar crossbow, or Ghost Eye's long-range attack, they were all essentially the same. They all used special formats to interfere with special environments to form special scenes. The only difference was the degree of completion. The logic world had the highest degree of completion. Its laws were strict. The planar crossbow's interference power was extremely strong. It was the most lethal. As for Ghost Eye, he was the most casual in comparison. He had more or less stripped away the material plane of the energy transportation environment. He had only set up a basic structure in the abyss, but he had fully utilized the particularity of the abyss to make his attacks simpler and more direct. Well, the abyss was a place that could not be ignored in the end. Right now it seemed that the 3rd floor was no more than a prison. Though the polar regions were good, they were still a bit too far from the real plane. Only the abyss, this wondrous dimension, could accomplish many things. It gave Luonan Tuo anew. Perhaps it should be said that it made up for the part that was lacking in his system. His soul cloak and his deep-sea scene seemed to fit into the special environment and special power of the abyss to achieve twice the result with half the effort. I really want to give it a try. Then let's give it a try. As a researcher, Luonan was very clear on how important inspiration was. He had Ghost Eye as a test subject with enough weight and restraint. No, an experimental partner. How rare was that? How could he let Ghost Eye leave under these circumstances? Ghost Eye, that old bastard, was quite generous. He really did accompany Luonan to play along. Of course, Luonan's confrontation with Ghost Eye was mostly just for absorption. Even moving the mist muslin was just a small test. The current Xia city was absolutely not a good place to truly verify the soul cloak in the deep-sea scene. To verify Luonan's most fundamental self-format. A total of 5 extraordinaries were paying attention to Luonan. They were paying attention to the blood wool bracelet. They were paying attention to the gathering of thousands of people. They were paying attention to the towering fortress that slowly set sail under the cover of the night. Every detail of the changes inside and outside of the fortress was brought under a magnifying glass for analysis. Not a single detail could be hidden from people. Needless to say, Luonan's cobweb altar was inextricably linked to this fortress. Every second that the fortress existed in the abyss brought a wondrous force to the cobweb altar. Even if the human-faced arachnid was hidden deep in the polar region and could effectively avoid the fortress, Luonan would still need to draw a few more times to verify the fortress in this environment, no matter how big his heart was. The Xia City region was not a place for experimentation no matter what. Luonan could only shift his thoughts outwards. In any case, the range of his soul cloak had already expanded by several thousand kilometers in the past week. He could not do it in Xia City, but he could do it in the boundless wastelands and the ocean. Luonan would not let go of this learning and verification process. He slowly exhaled. His mind underwent the arrangement of the overall planning technique, cleverly dividing it into 2 sets of staggered mission sequences. One was in Xia City, absorbing nourishment like a thirst. The other was in the distant Pacific Ocean, learning and practicing on the spot. He was a beginner. There were successes and failures, but his capital was robust. His train of thought was correct. Luonan could afford to wait. He could afford to play. He could afford to train. He could afford to do several rounds of verification. Even though his mental exhaustion was quite large, he still gradually brought out the rules and regulations. He had not spoken for several minutes already. The tens of thousands of spectators, including He Yuan at his side, all thought that he was doing his best to fight Ghost Eye in the abyss. They were completely unaware that half of his energy had already been divided 7,000 kilometers away. He was tossing and turning in the Pacific Ocean where mutants wreaked havoc. Luonan could not avoid adapting to this marvelous method of use while he was verifying and practicing. Unlike the monotonous cloud world where reality and illusion were indistinguishable, Luonan's consciousness wandered the earth. The first thing he sensed was a natural scene that was much more colorful. Other things aside, he sensed the state of light and darkness in different time zones at the same time. He was presented with an inconceivable macroscopic perspective. In this moment, it was as if he was stroking the soft and bumpy surface of the ocean and the earth. He was swimming freely within the uneven thickness of the clouds. He was feeling the high-speed rotation of the planet within the void of the universe. It was under the touch of such a marvelous scene that Luonan's sense of space had a marvelous distortion. A subtle change occurred in his observation of the real world. Luonan didn't know when it happened, but he suddenly felt a bit absent-minded. An inexplicable thought was born and it quickly magnified. Where am I? What kind of perspective am I using to observe this world, this planet, this universe? When doubts were about to fill his entire train of thought, the seed of an answer that had long been buried deep in his heart broke out from the ground. 3 long lines shot out together. They pierced through the boundless, penetrated the dim and bright, and penetrated the existent and the non-existent. They constructed a classical Cartesian coordinate system, locking Luonan himself at the origin. He was at a loss. He was cold. He was here, but he had nowhere to rely on. It was as if he was isolated from the world. From Luonan's perspective, the answer was not surprising. It was merely a single me. Aside from this, all thoughts and distractions were discarded. They were discarded like worn-out shoes. And it was precisely after he clarified this fundamental principle that a marvelous curve suddenly appeared in the world within Luonan's eyes. Chapter 576. The mess in the living room had already been cleaned up by the AI butler, but Ari was unwilling to return to the live camera no matter what. Even if the live broadcast platform wanted to argue with him about the contract and ask him for compensation, he would accept it. Just as he made up his mind, a communication wave penetrated through the wind and rain and came in. The one contacting him was the young man that his teacher Gong Qi had been nurturing for the past few years, Yuan Fei. This person was very lively and reliable. However, Ari didn't like him for no reason. At most, it was because the same sex repels each other. Yuan Fei had a smooth sailing life under Gong Qi's guidance in the past few years. It was only when he messed up his business in Xia City that he came back dejectedly. Ari was happy for a few minutes because of this. Now that he thought about it, maybe he should give Luonan a drumstick first. That would make things more balanced. It was fine not thinking about Luonan, but thinking about that person made his mood sour. For a moment, Ari wanted to refuse the call with the reason that he was doing a live broadcast. But when he thought about how his every move could be said to be the center of attention, he couldn't hide the fact that he had temporarily left the table, so he could only answer the call with a toothache expression and said indifferently, "Hello. Senior Brother Luo, I wanted to contact you, but I was worried that you were doing a live broadcast." Ari's toothache intensified. "What the hell are you staring at me for? Are you trying to snitch on me in the future?" And such a hypocritical and respectful form of address. Who knows what the other side is like? No matter what, it was unlikely that Yuan Fei would open a video call with Ari to verify the degree of respect behind the form of address. Of course, Ari would do the same. The two of them pretended to communicate using traditional communication methods. Senior Brother Luo headquarters just held a joint conference. The president, the vice presidents, and the secretaries all participated. But the teacher is still absent. Ari furrowed his brows. Calling him teacher so intimately, have you confirmed your relationship? You haven't even offered him tea. Aren't you ashamed to talk about it? Ari was in a bad mood and was in no mood to respond. He said coldly, "The teacher is in seclusion. Of course he doesn't have time." Which extraordinary ranked almighty did not take months to comprehend absolute arts. He has to leave seclusion after a meeting. What can he do in the end? But this involves Xia City's latest stance. I heard that someone has already proposed to ease the relationship with Xia City. A joint development or something. Once that happens, it will be difficult to make changes. Ri's chest tightened when she heard that. The photo of Jean Tong's headband was still going viral on the internet. Could the people from headquarters stop their greed for money? Even if you want money, you need to be alive to spend it, right? Looking at it from another perspective, the reason why a bunch of old fogies with their necks buried in the soil were working so hard was most likely because they wanted to extend their life with money to spend a little longer. A breakthrough cultivation theory did indeed have the opportunity to achieve this. That was what he thought, but he would never agree with Yuan Fei's words. He immediately put on the airs of a senior brother and scolded, "You've been working in the association for a long time and you even have a position. Why are you spreading rumors? What does the association want to do? What does the teacher want to do? Do we need you to report it? You should learn from me and go into seclusion for a few more days. Cultivating and comprehending is the right thing to do." It felt much better to have someone to vent his anger on. No matter how scheming and shrewd Yuan Fei was, he couldn't calm down for a while after being forcefully rebutted by Art. He stiffly replied, "Senior brother, I'm busy with a live broadcast. I won't disturb you any longer." Then he hung up. The relationship between the two sides would most likely be frozen for a period of time. Ri didn't really care. He had his family backing him. His starting point, achievements and background, including his relationship with his teacher Gong Qi and their mutual interests, all of them crushed Yuan Fei. Yuan Fei only had a slight advantage in age and a bit of potential that hadn't been realized yet. If they really clashed, Yuan Fei wouldn't amount to shit. But some people had some words that only disturbed people's hearts. Yuan Fei's reminder caused Ri's train of thought to deviate a bit. He vaguely knew why his teacher had to go into seclusion. Some time ago he had been ordered to hire professionals to search for the location of Snake Tongue's true body. It seemed that his teacher had set up a trap on Snake Tongue's missing soul body. He could retrieve the face he lost in Xia City. However, Snake Tongue was cunning and intelligent. She was also cautious. She had hidden her true body extremely well. He hadn't completed his task. He was originally worried that he would be reprimanded, but he didn't expect that there would be no follow-up. It seemed that Gong Qi had really gone into seclusion. He hadn't replied for a month. He had even gone to the point of fasting. Only the nourishment cabin responsible for maintaining his life was still operating. Ri was actually a bit worried. After all, Gong Qi had turned his seclusion, which was supposed to be a cover, into a real one. He had turned important matters that involved his face and personal interests into a fake one. It was quite inconsistent with his usual meticulous planning to the point of being cruel and ruthless. He felt that he had encountered some unexpected situation. So Ri had bitten off more than he could chew when it came to the matters of Dripping Sword and Sprinkler Man. He had even continued to expand his influence. He wanted to probe the situation over at Xia City. The entire inner world knew of his relationship with Gong Qi. If his teacher were to suffer a great loss over there, the other side's response, especially a response from someone like Gao Tianshi, would most likely give some clues. The problem was that Xia City's response had been normal from the beginning until now. Everyone was tearing at each other, shooting their mouths at each other, greeting each other's parents and relatives. They were also mindful of their bottom lines. They wouldn't truly provoke trouble on the level of extraordinaries. Everything was far too normal. In addition, Gong Qi's near-invincible extraordinariness had brought about far too much inertia. It was to the extent that Ri had gradually forgotten his original intentions. He had sunk deep into his favorite profession of shooting his mouth off and spitting his mouth until now. A person's thoughts were always strung together. The previously forgotten links were only temporarily buried by the dust and sand of emotions. Now Luo Nan had shaken the world with his heaven-bestowed talent and grandeur. He had taken out the picture of the golden copper headband and other stimulating information to show how extraordinary he was. He had contended with Ghost Eye in the Abyss region. He was calm and unruffled, skillful and at ease. These circumstances, which he had never thought of before, were strung together and suddenly raised the world. Of course, this included Ri's own assessment of Luo Nan's status and ability. Some plots that he would never have thought of before were picked up one after another by the thoughts that blew away the dust and sand. They were like an iron chain that coldly stretched across the front, reminding Ri of its existence. Motherf***Ker. Could it be that teacher really was tripped by a horse-tripping rope? Ari still didn't think of the worst-case scenario. After all, the data from the life support system wouldn't lie. But he couldn't help but shiver in his heart when he thought of Gongqi gnashing his teeth in frustration and helplessness. Oh, he was thinking too much, right? What if he wasn't? Ari couldn't stay any longer. If it really was a horse-tripping rope situation, then Gongqi suffering a great loss was secondary. His closed-door training caused him to be cut off from information and then hit the wall again. The consequences were truly unbearable. Gongqi couldn't bear it. He and his family couldn't bear it either. The more he thought about it, the more he felt uncomfortable. Ari subconsciously reached out his hand and touched the emergency communication device he carried with him. According to Gongqi, if there really was an urgent matter, he could use this communication device to wake him up from his special state and get in touch with him. It wasn't that Ari had never done this before, but he couldn't find a reason to do so. Now that Jin Tong was killed, the cage theory was born, and even the Abyss district wasn't stable. All of this came from that damned Luonan. This should be an urgent matter. In the end, Ari stomped his feet and practically closed his eyes as he walked to the study. He didn't dare to look at the discussions online anymore. He turned off the live broadcast and rushed out of the room like he was fleeing. He went straight out the door, started the car, and drove towards the secret location of Gongqi's closed-door training. Emergency communication could be done over a long distance, but some words and some things were better said face-to-face. This was a matter of attitude. It was 4 or 5 in the morning in Chan City right now. Due to the hurricane passing through, it was raining cats and dogs. Could be said that one couldn't even see their fingers in front of them. Ari wasn't in the mood to play the midnight car game. He went straight into autopilot mode. The headlights tore through the darkness on the road as he advanced at high speed along the magnetic track. But this way, the 10 or 20 minutes on the road would be very hard to endure. Did he want to listen to some boring news like, Guala rapidly upgraded to a Category 3 hurricane? Suspected to be influenced by factors other than meteorological conditions? So even though Ari screamed madly in his heart, I don't want to see it, his fingers still opened up the audio and video system honestly. He connected to the live broadcast platform and watched the latest news from the circular conference room in Xia City. Of course, the bullet screen and whatnot were all blocked. Then Ari saw Luo Nan on the podium. His eyes were half closed and his eyelids were slightly trembling. This scene wasn't much different from before. It was just that he was a bit more focused. But it was strange. The instant Ari cast his gaze on the podium, Luo Nan also opened his eyes. His gaze was focused on the camera. It was more like he was aiming at Ari's eyes. Ari's heart thumped. An inexplicable cold current gushed out along with the blood pumped out from his heart. It soaked half of his chest in a cold and soaked sensation. There was also a prickling sensation of being ground by coarse sand. What's going on? Has his fear of Luo Nan reached this level? The car speeding through the wind and rain wasn't affected by Ari's mood. It continued to drive strictly according to the established route. The AI butler followed its preset priorities and played the information that was currently most worthy of its owner's attention. It just so happened that it was news related to Hurricane Guala. The relevant situation was updated. Guala is predicted to make landfall on the west coast of Nadu Island in 20 minutes. The maximum wind speed at the center is currently 197 km per hour. The giant waves in the early stages are likely to bring along a Class C surge. A portion of the marine mutants will attack Nadu, Pala, New Ark and other coastal defensive lines. We can't rule out the possibility of a Class B or higher mutant appearing in the wind zone. Ari fiercely knocked on the steering wheel. He was a bit irritated. His route just so happened to be within the range of influence of the surge tide. If his luck was bad, he would encounter a few mutants that came ashore. That would truly be disgusting. However, listening to the unfinished meaning of the news, it seemed that the upgrade of Hurricane Guala this time was caused by the influence of a powerful mutant within the wind zone. A powerful vicious beast that could temporarily affect extreme weather hadn't appeared in the surrounding seas for a long time. Chapter 577. The hurricane several thousand kilometers away continued to approach the archipelago region. Luo Nan's mind had already reached the shore a step earlier. It continued to expand forward with a steady momentum. But the current expansion already appeared to Luo Nan as a different kind of law. The root of this expansion was not at the forefront. Instead, it was at the core of this expanding force. In other words, Luo Nan himself. Luo Nan's figure congealed on the podium. But the structure of space and time around him was like a projection that was hard to distinguish between real and fake. Layers and layers appeared with Luo Nan at the center. This was the bubble that he had demonstrated to the participants before. It symbolized the cage of humanity. Looking at it from this angle, everyone in the circular conference room, everyone in the Shangding building, everyone in Xia City, and even everyone within the range of Luo Nan's senses were wrapped within a bubble. The only differences were in terms of stability and range of coverage. Of course, the shape of each bubble was different as well. The bubbles of the vast majority of people, or rather the majority of people, could collapse and regenerate at any time. But for a short period of time, the bubbles would warp and transform into all sorts of complex shapes. The reason for this was the pressure of other bubbles and even deeper environmental conditions. Right now, Luo Nan's bubble was one of the greatest sources of pressure for the people present. This bubble was far too enormous compared to everyone else. The stability of the core region far exceeded that of everyone else. So much so that the 1,400 people in the conference room were all suppressed to varying degrees. And under the effect of the group consciousness that had already been finalized, certain aspects converged to form the force field of the ring of blood and wool together. But this did not mean that Luo Nan's own bubble could do as it pleased. Not to mention the powerful pressure from the 5 extraordinaries around him, the seemingly ordinary things around him. The podium, the circular conference room, the Shangding building. Everything he sensed on the plane of reality was simply a part of an incomparably enormous bubble. That incomparably enormous bubble was the environment of this world. It was the embodiment of space-time power that leaned more towards the material plane. Luo Nan faintly sensed the indescribably complex curvature of this space-time. In other words, it was tantamount to feeling the tiny traces of the boundless universe added to this place. Such a realization was undoubtedly the manifestation of his observational ability advancing a step further. It was in this context that new discoveries inevitably arrived. Luo Nan noticed that there were a few areas worthy of special attention on the complex curved surface of space-time. The magnitude of the impact was not something that could be caused by any small bubble. Furthermore, there was a relatively fleeting point behind a certain massively warped region. It was similar to the basketball team of extraordinaries that hovered in the night sky of Xia City. From behind the warped and deformed structure, it radiated powerful stimulative information that made him unhappy. He was almost certain that this was a transcendent. Luo Nan's soul cloak covered an enormous area of effect, but it wasn't strange at all. Because part of it was based on the condensation ring. According to the different activity levels of water molecules, the progress in the ocean was faster and the progress in the inland was slower. However, it almost covered the entire East Asian continent and half of the Pacific Ocean. It was just that Luo Nan knew that he was unable to handle the enormous amount of information within. He didn't investigate, didn't notice, and didn't do anything. He just maintained a normal state of attention towards a few sensitive areas. In such a vast area, no matter how rare extraordinaries were, it was still possible to encounter a few. But the problem was that the distance of this stimulation point was too close. Luo Nan's first reaction was that it was within the range of Xia City, but that wasn't right. The fuzzy judgment of being very far yet very close was truly nauseating. Luo Nan had no choice but to split a portion of his mind to pay attention to this point. After a few consecutive rounds of stimulation, he filled in more and more sensory information in an attempt to restore the information. As the constructed information became more and more complete, there was a sudden jolt. All sorts of one-sided information instantly combined in front of the answer that already existed, returning to their respective positions. In the end, what was restored in the domain of perception was the astral winds and clouds that spanned thousands of kilometers, as well as the blood-colored ape that flew back and forth. The cloud world. So naturally, the target that gave him negative stimulation also appeared, Gong Qi. This deputy secretary general of the society who had fallen into the clouds was undoubtedly a psychic extraordinaire. He was a powerful person that stood at the apex of the inner world. Gong Qi floated within the astral winds of the clouds. His expression was grave and stern. It looked like he had yet to find a way to break through this cloud labyrinth. On the other hand, Luo Nan had already extended his consciousness to his headquarters. If Luo Nan were to use physical distance to discuss the situation, then Luo Nan's current situation was already difficult for Gong Qi to reach. Well, this was just a joke at the moment. But Luo Nan still remembered that Her Majesty Empress Wu had a request. She wanted him to achieve what was known as the enemy of 10,000. Luo Nan wanted to completely incorporate the situation he faced into the framework of formatting theory. He wanted to consider all sorts of factors and calculate all sorts of conditions. It was as if he was conducting a large-scale battle to solve a large problem. Now it was like this. It seemed that he already had an opportunity to include Gongqi. Luo Nan wasn't prepared to act blindly without thinking before he could completely figure out the train of thought of this strategic plan. But there was an observation result before his eyes. It was impossible to ignore it no matter what. Luo Nan was certain that there was a similar type of bubble on the most complex and obvious curved surface of spacetime that he could observe. The bubble seemed to be a bit smaller, but it collided with the bubble, crisscrossing and deforming. It formed an indescribable shape, but it was hard to separate it as a whole. Similar collisions seemed to be occurring in various directions. But the main problem was that Luo Nan's consciousness followed the soul cloak and extended outwards. It followed the inconceivably warped surface. It seemed as though it was effortless for Luo Nan to move from one spacetime bubble to another spacetime bubble. The other spacetime was none other than the cloud world. Luo Nan's consciousness didn't go through the void corridor structure designed by his mother. He actually leaped over the barrier of spacetime and entered that marvelous world. Luo Nan was a bit stupefied. He couldn't help but consider. Was the warped scene he saw before him real? Was it normal and stable? What sort of meaning did it represent? There was some logic that could be deduced behind the newest observation result. It couldn't be ignored. It could be seen that on one hand the atmospheric bubble contained the small bubbles. It delineated the rules and laws of existence, forming a livable environment. But on the other hand, the atmospheric bubble suppressed the small bubbles. The small bubbles also affected the atmospheric bubble. The small bubbles also pushed and warped against each other. From beginning to end, a kind of repulsive force was manifested. This was the relationship between the I and the not me that Luo Nan spoke of earlier. And this relationship could still be established by expanding outwards from a sociological perspective. It was like anchored a new argument for his grandfather's theory of the triple format of self, society and heaven and earth. Luo Nan had yet to completely straighten out the logical relationship within, but he received this new level of information. The depth of his understanding of the range covered by the soul cloak increased by a large margin. Correspondingly, the amount of information contained instantly increased by several times. No, at the very least by several tens or even hundreds of times. Luo Nan lacked an accurate estimate of this. He still followed the established model and perceptual precision to analyze the situation of the relevant region, especially the problems related to the cloud world and the palace enlightenment. And the enormous flow of information squeezed in the next instant. It nearly stuffed his brain to the point of bursting. It was as if a nuclear bomb had exploded in Luo Nan's brain. The physiological fusing mechanism was forcefully activated. For 2 seconds his mind was practically blank. His reaction to the outside world had already come to a complete standstill. It must be known that aside from clairvoyance around the Chan City archipelago, he was also fighting against Ghost Eye in the Abyss region. The pressure was already quite great. If not for the fact that the force field of the Ring of Bloodwill had stabilized, and the few consciousnesses within the force field had been stimulated to enter a semi-awakened state, it would have been equivalent to having a few more maintenance personnel. Otherwise, the space bastion might have exploded on the spot. No matter how big Luo Nan's heart was, he was shocked into a cold sweat upon encountering this sort of situation. Ghost Eye was quite astute. He sensed a large fluctuation in the defenses of the Blood Intent Ring and immediately pulled back. He took advantage of the situation to end this confrontation, which no longer had any significance of verification. 500 kilometers away, Ghost Eye let out a breath of relief. The twisted handprints of his hands dispersed, and the sinister force field that nearly caused all the passengers on the luxurious cruise ship to collapse slowly disappeared. At this time, if the beautiful host Dan E could ask, "Mr. Ghost Eye, how did your bet go?" then the program would be considered complete. But the problem was that Dan E was able to sit steadily in her chair. Her body and consciousness were completely stiff. Though it wasn't as exaggerated as a certain person's claim that she was scared to the point of pissing herself, it was really difficult for her to continue hosting the program. Therefore, the audience of the inner world could only stare blankly as Ghost Eye slowly withdrew his power. He muttered to himself and put on a face that was neither happy nor angry to entice the imagination of everyone. Ari, who was currently cruising in the wind and rain, couldn't help but fantasize about whether or not Ghost Eye had given Luo Nan a sneak attack and left a fatal hidden wound or something. There seemed to be some problems with Luo Nan's state in the last few seconds. The red and white color of the blood on his face was extremely obvious. Before Ari could finish her thoughts, the car had already taken a detour from the coastal highway and entered a short-distance undersea tunnel that required an extremely high level of authority. This tunnel had undergone a special design. It used expensive special glass as its main body, achieving the effects of a single mirror and limited invisibility. Looking out from the inside of the tunnel, one could directly see the gloomy undersea world around the island. Looking in from the outside, one could only see a turbid turbulence. There were no traces of artificial construction. After passing through this tunnel, one would arrive at a group of small uninhabited islands and reefs that headquarters had specially opened up for closed-door cultivation. This was the legacy left behind by the eruption of a local volcano during the Third World War. Though the geological environment wasn't stable, it was extremely suitable for ability users of higher realms to cultivate and comprehend. It was said that it would yield twice the result with half the effort. Chapter 578. Even if Ari was a grade B powerhouse, she still felt awkward and depressed that she was asking for trouble in such a hurricane, especially during the tide rush period. For a second or two he almost wanted to turn around and go back. But when she saw Luo Nan's clearly childish face within the video system, Luo Nan's face was calm and unperturbed. The blood pumped out of his heart was mixed with stimulating toxins. She no longer considered the possibility of giving up halfway. Ari slapped the steering wheel heavily and got off the car. He registered with the security personnel in this area and asked for a raincoat that was better than nothing. Then he was about to rush into the curtain of rain. But the security captain called out to him at this time. This experienced B-rank person said very seriously, "Old he, right now Volcano Island has a guest staying for cultivation. Don't misunderstand if you encounter him." Ari did not find it strange that a guest was stationed here. Since the cultivation effects of this small island were extremely good, many ability users were willing to pay a high price to rent the seclusion rooms of the upper echelons of the society to conduct critical cultivation. The society had specially arranged for a few similar areas to be rented out. Not only could they amass wealth, but they could also exchange resources with other people or powers. He went, "Oh." Then he asked in passing, "Which side is it?" "A certain upper echelon of the Order of Justice. I'm not too sure about the specifics." The Order of Justice. Ari was startled. He thought to himself that this was the biggest joke in the world. Who didn't know that the Order of Justice's scales of truth was a first-rate treasure that aided in cultivation? Why would they need to ask the society for help if they had this sort of supreme-grade sacrificial artifact that could suppress the destiny of the Order? Could it be that they were secretly involved in some shady business? Ari's mind spun a few times but he could not figure it out. He just responded, put on the raincoat and walked outside. He passed by his own flying car and subconsciously glanced inside. He saw the video system that had just been turned off not too long ago. A flash of inspiration suddenly flashed through his mind. At the same time, Luo Nan's excessively young face flashed through his mind. A thought suddenly turned through his mind. Speaking of which, wasn't it because of the Order of Justice that headquarters became enemies with the Xia City branch and provoked Luo Nan? He had once heard Gong Chi talk about the deeper reason behind this. Wonderful. Ari only hesitated beside the car for 2 seconds before she tore off her raincoat and got back into the car. She clenched her teeth and entered the livestream platform again. She then turned on the cooperative livestream mode and bullet comments. Due to his arrival, the livestream inevitably received a huge amount of mockery. Ari turned a blind eye to it, or perhaps he had fully absorbed the deep malice and triggered the same emotions in his heart. He faced the 30,000 viewers, twitched his lips and sneered, "Congratulations to everyone for witnessing a miracle." A 16-year-old kid who entered the inner world for less than 3 months had an extremely exciting and prolonged confrontation with a veteran extraordinary who has been at the peak for 30 years. Before he could finish, the bullet screen in the live streaming channel and the comments on the forum exploded. Oh, I love conspiracy theories. I told you this is purely a manga setting, okay? Moreover, it's facing the risk of being cut in half at the waist and having a bad ending. Goddess Ari, I don't understand what you're saying. Can you please be more suicidal? Tiger touching Ari, God, I'm going to eat some broken limbs and minced meat. Could it be that the Emperor's new clothes have been torn? Ghost Eye, what do you think? Luonan Hiyuan, what about you guys? There were all sorts of comments. Although their stances were different, the confusion and doubt between the lines couldn't be hidden. Even though there had already been over an hour of foreshadowing and the subversive impact of the cage theory, a few minutes of a newbie and an experienced and powerful extraordinary fighting on equal footing still exceeded the limits of the majority of people's imaginations. The more experienced they were, the more inconceivable they felt. This was the first time Ari's words had touched the hearts of the majority of people ever since she became a guest on the live stream. She had touched the extremely sensitive chord in people's hearts. Ari paid no attention to the layer upon layer of bullet screens. She just twisted the corner of her lips and continued to sneer. I'm not doubting Senior Ghost Eye's verification process. No matter how much Senior Ghost Eye doesn't bother with trifles, he still possesses the style that an extraordinary should have. It's impossible for him to put effort into a lie that can be easily seen through. I believe in his professional integrity and his ability to make wise and far-sighted choices. With a plan in mind, Ari easily made the majority of the audience dizzy. He looked at the questioning and cursing bullet screens in the projection area and shrugged calmly. Yes. I believe that there are no problems with the confrontation between Senior Ghost Eye and Luonan. I can even say that there are no problems with the strength that Luonan himself has displayed. He is worthy of being called the humanoid infrasonic array. He really does stand on a level that we cannot imagine. If I were to participate in this gamble, I would have already lost my pants by now. The surrounding 30,000 viewers online were truly stupefied. Some people even wanted to pull open the projection to see if there was a gun pointed at the back of Ari's head. Ari could show the back of his head to this group of scum, but he was more than happy to show his clear stance and his undisguised malice. Right now, Luonan was still standing on the podium in the circular conference room within the livestream. It was said that he was adjusting the structure of the blood intent ring to wake up those hypnotized idiots one after another. On the other hand, Hiyuan's cold and clear gaze pierced through the camera lens. It was biting, cold and piercing. Oh, this was the daughter of the He family, one of the most outstanding achievements of the Star Alliance Committee's Team AB. If she was standing in front of him, Ari really would have to behave himself. But they were separated by 7,000 kilometers. What was there to be afraid of? Therefore, Ari didn't stumble at all. He spoke eloquently. What I'm most curious about right now is how Luonan's strength and potential were accumulated and realized. How was he able to jump to this level in a short period of 70 to 80 days? This doesn't belong to the category of normal. Look, this is an abnormal situation. This is where the problem arises. At this time, it would be perfect if there was someone who could cooperate and act as a supporting character or something. Unfortunately, Ari wanted to continue singing this one-man show. Is Luonan a genius? I don't know. But from the information he registered with the headquarters, he wasn't one 2 months ago. He followed his family's so-called formatting theory and painstakingly accumulated for 5 years. He still hasn't touched the ceiling of awakening. He only became a psychic who was better than nothing. He relied on the garrulous psychic diagram and the outbreak of the calamity of the human-faced arachnid to enter the society's line of sight. Is this kind of person a genius? Ari had completely entered the mode of shooting his mouth off. This was his invincible state on the internet in recent years. I've even seen people say that Luonan has potential and accumulation. He just hasn't been enlightened yet. He entered the society and received proper cultivation guidance. Then he'll understand everything. I don't know if there's such a situation. I just saw him energetically advocating for formatting theory on the stage. He never mentioned a single word about the guidance of a senior or a friend. Of course, these words were a bit inaccurate. At the very least, Luonan had mentioned the guidance of Her Majesty Empress Wu. He had also talked about the condensation ring in class. But right now what was important was momentum and momentum. He didn't care about the details. Ari spread his hands and made a helpless gesture. There's nothing I can do if you guys think so. But if everyone still has a bit of critical spirit and the ability to think independently, then there's no harm in carefully considering this. Luonan, this mediocre genius, has miraculously risen for over 2 months. Aside from his dazzling deeds, What else has happened in Xia City? Aside from the calamity of the human-faced arachnid that I've talked about before? Oh, this is Quantum Corporation's fault. But could it be that everyone hasn't heard that this company has gone berserk and conducted experiments in Xia City? They've encircled their territory in order to excavate some hidden treasure in Xia City? Ari laughed very happily in the face of the rapidly boiling atmosphere in the live broadcast room. Also, the conflict between the Order of Justice and the Xia City branch has mustered a large force, and Wang and the majority of the branch have been destroyed. Why? Could it be because of a hedonistic follower? A child? There's no need to hide the conflict between headquarters and the Xia City branch, including the 2000th young miss incident. Why has Luonan always become the focus of everyone? Could it be that he's a natural-born troublemaker? After considering all the subjective factors, shouldn't we also consider the more objective facts? When all the problems point towards a single focal point, we don't need to ponder over what he did. Instead, we need to ponder over where he is in reality, what kind of space and resources he occupies. You're perfectly fine blocking the middle of the road. If you don't get hit, who will? Don't you think so? After leaving behind a string of questions, Ari simply cut off the live broadcast signal with a sneer. He opened the door and got out of the car. He no longer cared about the follow-up reactions. He knew that because of his overly straightforward hints, at this moment, at least half of the audience would curse him for having sinister intentions, shameless and despicable intentions. His personal reputation would most likely be ruined, and there might even be some trouble at the headquarters. But so what? After several minutes of confrontation between Luonan and Ghost Eye, he had already become a joke. There was nothing to feel distressed about. Plus, if Luonan was allowed to develop smoothly, given the conflict between Luonan and his teacher, and with himself, there would be conflict sooner or later. And it would certainly be to the point where one side would die. With Luonan's terrifying rate of progress, if he didn't take advantage of the opportunity to make a move now, would he wait until Luonan calmly amassed his troops and swept his path before regretting it? Truthfully speaking, even Ari was a bit convinced by the end of his explanation. It seemed that there really was a high possibility of following this train of thought. It would really be funny if he hit the mark by a fluke. Ari picked up the raincoat and put it on. He looked up at the sky. The rainwater poured on his face, bringing with it the cool and fishy smell of the ocean. It seemed to be the smell of Luonan's blood. He yelled, "Awesome!" He didn't care about the security captain's hesitant expression as he clenched his teeth and charged into the wind and rain. There was still a straight line of 40 kilometers to the location of Gong Qi's closed-door training. Even though Ari was a B-rank power, he would still need to spend 20 minutes on the road in this kind of damned weather. It didn't matter to Ari anymore. He faced the wind and rain, swiftly walking through the rugged environment created by the islands, reefs, and the curtain of rain. When he encountered the boundless sea surface where the seawater rose, he used his telekinesis to interfere and solidify it. He treaded on the water and was truly delighted. Before this, he had hoped that the security personnel of these islands and reefs would be strong enough to minimize the effects of tide rush. But right now he really wished for 2 blind mutants to jump out and serve as Lord Ho's practice. Unfortunately, the road to Gong Qi's closed-door training was peaceful and quiet. Rumble.